We are discussing disaster management and various types of disasters. Previously, we have discussed about floods. Now, we'll be discussing about earthquakes, then cyclones, and landslides. Let us first try to understand what is an earthquake. See, earthquake is nothing but a sudden and violent shaking of ground. Okay, it's a sudden and violent shaking of the ground with the release of energy in the form of waves, and these waves are known as seismic waves. Seismic waves, they reach the surface of the earth, and which is responsible for this destruction. Okay, so a sudden and violent shaking of the ground responsible for releasing energy in the form of seismic waves, which reach the surface of the earth and are responsible for large scale destruction, is known as an earthquake. Then what is seismology? Study of earthquakes is known as seismology, which is the instrument used to measure seismic waves. The instrument used to measure seismic waves is seismograph. Okay. Now can you see the diagram on the left? Try to understand that there is a fault line you can see in this diagram. Okay, there are two blocks of rocks, rock block 1 and 2. There are various rocks in the earth's crust, they are continuously moving. Okay, the crust is not stable. Now what happens is that when there is a breakage of a rock along that fault line, there is sudden release of energy. Okay, and this release is in the form of seismic waves. Okay, so earthquakes are caused when the underground rocks, they suddenly break and there is a rapid motion along this fault line. Okay, so there is release of energy. Can you see the star over there? This energy is released in the form of seismic waves. Now that star is a point underground, or let us call it as a spot underground, where the rocks first break. Okay, it is known as focus or the hypocenter of the earthquake. So the spot underground where the rocks first break is called as focus or the hypocenter of the earthquake. Now see a place on the surface, you see another star which is yellow in color. So it is just above the focus, okay, and it is on the ground surface. So it is a spot which is present just above the focus or the hypocenter, and this is known as the epicenter of the earthquake. Okay, then you can see how seismic waves are traveling away from the earthquake. They are generated at the hypocenter, but they reach the surface. Okay, so this is how an earthquake is generated or is caused because of the breaking and rapid motion of the rock present in the earth's crust. Having understood how an earthquake is formed, let us now discuss what are the effects of earthquake. Recently there were earthquakes in Turkey, you might have seen that. So they are highly devastating. They cause extensive damage to life and also property. So the effects of earthquakes are those which affect human communities for centuries. Okay, first and foremost effect is shaking of the ground. You can feel the tremors. Okay, this shaking of the ground, everybody can feel it if you are present on the ground, or for that matter, some articles in your house, they begin to move or they shake, okay, because of the earthquake. Then now this shaking of the ground, it depends on the duration of the earthquake. Okay, also it is largely dependent upon the energy that is contained or energy that is released in the ground. So that is also dependent. And at what distance is the focus or the hypocenter located from the surface of the ground? If the hypocenter is situated deep underground, then it might not happen that the surface will feel the earthquakes. There will be a little bit of ground shaking, but the surface will not break. But if the hypocenter is located very near to the ground, just a few meters deep in the ground, then the effects are devastating. Okay. Again, then there is damage to man-made structures or collapse of man-made structures, such as buildings. Then bridges collapse. There is loss of life and general property. People are living in the buildings, they are at a greater risk. Okay, when if an earthquake is going to damage or cause collapse of the buildings, then bridges. Okay, the lot of money is spent on getting this infrastructure, and in seconds there is loss of the public property. Okay, also there is loss of life. Many people die. Okay, thousands of people die in the earthquake. These are the effects which can be seen by the eyes, but the aftermath is more devastating. That means those who survive the earthquake, they have psychological effects. They cannot come out of that disaster image that happens in front of them. So they are somewhere stuck in, or they in the fear of that disaster. Therefore, there are psychological effects seen in the people who survive earthquakes. Then sometimes their parts of the bodies get damaged. Sometimes they lose a leg or a hand, and that is again, they cannot work, so they become completely dependent on other people. So this is again a effect of earthquake. Then a number of the property which has been lost and the time it takes to cope up, people get affected by various diseases. Okay, because the effect is such that some part of the body is affected. Okay, if they happen to survive the earthquake, they, for a short duration or for a long duration, they suffer from some kind of ailment. And there is lack of basic necessities, because these people, if they lose a hand or a leg, or they become vulnerable, then they cannot earn their livelihood, so they become completely dependent on the other people. So earthquakes are devastating. There are examples where they have proof to harm human life to a greater extent, and also to the general public property. Okay, so there is a need to mitigate the earthquakes. What are the mitigation strategies? Weak spots in the buildings can absorb the vibrations of earthquake. Okay, then keeping the pads or floats beneath the building so that they can absorb the vibrations of the earthquake. Okay, in the areas where earthquakes are frequent, one can use wooden house instead of cement buildings. Old buildings have to be inspected and they can be reinforced so as to increase their earthquake resistance. So in this diagram here you can see disaster mitigation concepts. What are those? Immediate TV coverage. Yes, if a disaster such as earthquake has happened, one can immediately inform the authorities and the people should be made aware that there is an earthquake in this area. Emergency alert system, that means we have National Disaster Management Authority, State Disaster Management Authority. Their teams have to be informed about the disaster. Water discharge tunnel, okay, these have to be kept safe. If these are broken, then people living in the adjacent area, they might not get the water. There have to be earthquake survival kits given. Then emergency solutions. If an earthquake has happened in an area, then first aid has to reach these localities sooner as possible. Okay. Now those who have been saved, they have to be given emergency shelter sites. That means there has to be a provision made for homes to these people. Okay, provision of homes to these people. So all of these are the disaster mitigation concepts in relation to earthquakes. Yes, this is an illustration of the seismic map of India, or the zones which are there in the country, earthquake prone zones. There are 5 zones. Okay. Each has a different intensity. Okay. Zone 2, 3, 4 and 5. So you can see the northeast and few patches in the west coast, that is Gujarat, and again in the northern part of the country, that is in the Himalayas. You can see these are highly susceptible to the earthquakes. On the right you can see how is an earthquake measured. It is measured with the help of Richter scale. Okay, so a magnitude 8 or greater can totally destroy communities near its epicenter. So 8 or greater is considered most devastating. Okay. Okay, that was all about the earthquake. See, for earthquakes, we can establish the stations which can give early warning, okay, regarding the movement of the crust of the earth. Soil testing can also be done so that the stability of the building is assured. That means before any building or any structure is constructed, the soil of that area can be tested. Having understood earthquake, now let us look at what is another disaster, which is cyclone. Okay. Can you see cyclone? It is nothing but spiraling wind. Okay, but the height of cyclone is huge. Okay, and also the width is also huge. So this is a storm which occurs in the coastal areas, but its effects are seen about a few kilometers in the interior of the country. Okay, so the effects are not just located to the coast, effects are seen in the interiors also. So what is a cyclone? Cyclone is a spinning storm. Okay, can you see the diagram? Look at it. It is a spinning storm that rotates around a low pressure area or a low pressure center. See, how is a cyclone formed, that also we'll discuss. But remember that at the center of the cyclone is a low pressure area, okay, and the surrounding is a high pressure. So what happens, the air from the high pressure continuously moves into the low pressure, and that is responsible for the spiraling of the wind. Okay, so spiraling winds are generated because there is a continuous movement of the high pressure into the low pressure. So how is a cyclone formed? See, cyclones are formed when warm, moist air above 26 degree over the ocean rises upward. Okay, so warm and moist air is formed just on the surface of the ocean. The temperature has to be 26 degree. It rises upward. Okay, so what happens then, the air from the surrounding high pressure, so a low pressure, basically a low pressure area is created, and the air from the surrounding high pressure moves into that low pressure. So can you see this calm eye? Okay, that is the central low pressure area, which is comparatively having less wind speed. But if you compare the outskirts to that calm eye, there will be high speed winds continuously moving into the low pressure. Okay, so air from the surrounding high pressure pushes into this calm low pressure. See, cyclones that are formed in the southern hemisphere of the earth, they spin in the clockwise direction. Okay, but the cyclones which are formed in the northern hemisphere, they spin in the anti-clockwise direction. Okay, having understood what is a cyclone and how it is formed, let us now look at the mitigation strategies for cyclones. Okay, first is coastal tree plantation. Coastal tree plantation means planting mangroves. You might have heard of mangroves. Mangroves are forest. Okay, mangrove trees, they form a forest in the coastal area, and there are particular or specific species of plants which can tolerate the salinity, high salinity. Okay, and therefore maintaining such forest along the coast is important in mitigating the cyclones. We have mangroves on the eastern coast. Sundarbans, earlier I have told you that they are the largest of the mangroves, one of the largest mangroves in the world. We also have them on the western coast. So what is the use of mangroves? That these trees, they act as buffer zones, okay, against the cyclone. So before cyclones they reach the land, trees will try to slow down their speed. Okay, and therefore that can minimize the effects of cyclones on the coastal land and also on the interior. Therefore these trees, they act as buffer zones against cyclones. So plantation of forests like mangroves play important role in managing the storms and cyclones. So first thing that can be done is coastal tree plantation. Second mitigation strategy is weather monitoring. Nowadays there is a lot of advancement in the technology. Therefore we can predict most of the disasters. See, development of low pressure zone over the oceans can be understood prior priorly, and therefore that can help in taking further steps, isn't it? So, an early warning might be given that in the Bay of Bengal or in the Arabian Sea, a low pressure area is developing. This might get converted into cyclone. So, this news can be given beforehand. And what will happen? The people, those who are living in the coastal areas, they can be shifted to the shelter homes or some other area, okay, safely, so that the effects of the so that they will not get affected by the cyclone. So timely warnings over here play important role, okay, in the weather monitoring. Then land use control. Land use control means if there are some buildings, people have houses facing the sea, they like to have buildings to be built on the which are near to the coast so that they can get a view of the sea. But such buildings, when they are built, certain precautionary steps have to be kept in mind. First regarding tsunami and second regarding cyclones. Buildings should be water and wind resistant, isn't it? Watertight doors and windows. We have discussed this when we were discussing floods also. That watertight doors and windows have to be installed in such buildings. Then if there are some older buildings in the coastal areas, these have to be retrofitted. That means they have to be repaired so that they become sturdy and they can resist the effects of cyclone. Then maintaining river embankments. We have discussed this before also. Embankments can be a stone wall or a mud wall which is of a particular height that prevents the water from entering the human settlements. Now, in these areas which are prone to cyclones, underground communication has to be established. That means underground communication lines should be mandatory. Okay, if they are above the ground, naturally they will be destroyed by the cyclones more frequently. Who is going to pay so much to reinstall them? So it puts a pressure on the government itself to reinstall these electrical transmission lines for that, and also the communication lines. Basically, electric transmission lines you have no option, but communication lines, if they are laid on the surface, then there is a loss in that case. So underground communication lines should become mandatory. Then preparedness. See, if a family or a human settlement is found to be living in a cyclone prone area, okay, people have to be prepared. Prepared for what? Mentally prepared for relocation, first of all. That cyclone is predicted, yes, they have to take their belongings and they have to come into the interior and settle somewhere else for that particular period. Then sometimes these disasters, they affect people. When they affect, wide roads have to be built in such areas for quick evacuation. The density of the settlements should not increase in such areas, okay. There has to be wide roads so people can be quickly evacuated. Then the government or the local agencies which are involved, they can build shelter houses, okay. If people are affected, so people can come and reside in shelter houses for that particular period when the cyclone is felt, and then afterwards they can go and live in their original houses. Very important is insurance cover has to be given to these residents which are living in the cyclone prone area. And public has to be increasingly made aware that there is a proper mitigation strategy for the cyclone and they have to shift. There is no option. So from the cyclone prone area, they have to be shifted to another area. So mentally people should be prepared, they should be well informed that this might happen in the future. So you have to shift to the interior of the country. Okay, see, cyclones cannot be controlled. Just like earthquakes, cyclones cannot be controlled, and effects can be mitigated through proper policies and strategies. Just now I said that there has to be a proper policy, like insurance cover to the residents, then building of shelter homes, then mentally preparing these people so they can shift to the interiors of the country, so for that particular period. So all of these mitigation strategies and policies can help to cope up with such disasters. Okay, then having discussed earthquakes, cyclones and their mitigation strategies, let us now discuss what is a landslide. See, landslide is a combination of earth movements like slope failure, then the rocks falling and debris flow under the action of gravity. Okay, this is seen in the mountainous areas. Okay, or if particularly in ghats also you can see this. Landslides are frequent in the monsoon season. If you see the northern part of our country, like Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, people have made settlements on mountainous slopes. Okay, which is very very dangerous. First of all, see why it is dangerous, because the mountainous slopes that are or the mountains that are present in the northern part of the country, there is very sparse vegetation. The the material is not that much efficient to hold the soil. Okay, the vegetation over there is sparse over these mountains, so naturally the landslides are common. Okay, because the soil is not able to hold the structures that are built on these mountainous slopes. Therefore, one has to think twice thrice when if you have to build any such structures on the slopes, because landslides become common. Now when there is a connectivity which has to be established, there is no option for the government but to make roads through the mountains. Those are known as ghats. But again, all safety measures are taken nowadays. Okay, the government tries its best to take all safety measures so as to prevent any landslide. But sometimes in rainy season, due to excessive rainfall, these landslides they become common. Okay, so one thing you have to remember, that it is earth which is moving, rocks are falling and the debris, but it is under the action of gravity. Okay, so there is a scientific process. What happens is that, see, when gravitational and other types of shear stresses along that slope exceed the shear strength of the materials forming those slope. Okay, so when the stress along the slope increases than the materials that form the slope, or the strength of the materials, in that case landslides occur. Okay, so what are the causes of landslides? First of all, they can occur due to sudden changes on the slope. Now, what are these sudden changes? First of all, composition of the slope may change, structure may change. Why all this changes? This changes because of the settlements and roads that are built on the slopes of mountains, isn't it? So the composition changes of the soil, then the structure changes, isn't it? Hydrology or the vegetation changes. So in the areas where there is low vegetation cover along the slopes, they are more prone to the landslides. Okay, so the roots of the trees, they hold the soil. Okay, so as a result of change in the composition, structure, hydrology or vegetation along the slope, landslides can occur. Why do these changes occur on the slope? Okay, due to excessive rainfall. This is seen in the areas which receive great amount of rainfall. Okay, then weathering can occur due to various agents. It can occur due to wind, it can occur due to rain. Okay, it can also occur because of human activities. So weathering, because they can just remove the rocks, isn't it? Then changing the weathering of slopes I'm talking about. Then changing of land use. Again, changing of land use, people nowadays have the habit of building huge farmhouses on the hills. So this is highly risky. Okay, unless and until you do some research regarding the soil and the slope, mountain slope. So such structures which are built on the slopes, they are at a greater risk to suffer from the landslide. You might have heard about Marine village. This tragedy, it occurred few years back when the landslide, it fell on the entire village, and entire village was destroyed in just fraction of seconds. So one should decide whether to have human settlements on such just below the such area. Okay, then developmental activities like building of roads for connectivity. The ghats are built, so that is also one of the reason. Excavation of minerals. Okay, excavation of minerals also is responsible for changing the land use, that is along the slope. Then tunnels, isn't it? All of these activities are responsible for causing the landslides. How can one mitigate the landslide or reduce its severity? First is afforestation. A very important part is afforestation along the slopes. Why? Because the roots of trees, they penetrate deep into the soil and they try to hold the soil, isn't it? So even if there is debris moving, the trees can also act as a barrier for that flow and restrict the amount of soil that is entering on the settlements which are present at the base of the slope or the roads which are built. So first and foremost is afforestation along the slopes. Then wired stone blocks. This you can see in various ghats. Okay, there are wired stone blocks. Huge wire mesh are arranged uh, so that the stones, if there are, they should not fall onto the road. So stone ridge is trapped with wire mesh to protect against the landslide. If you happen to visit any ghats, you can see this as a protective measure. This wired stone blocks are laid. Then retaining the wall. Okay, construction of any wall can also be done so as to prevent the effects of landslide. Okay, between the, if the slope is leading to any human settlement or roads, in that case a wall can be erected so as to prevent the effects of landslides. Then landslide hazard zonation mapping. Just like we have mapped the seismic zones of India, that we know the northeast is more prone to earthquakes, the Himalayan region is more prone to earthquakes. Okay, similarly we can do mapping of different zones regarding the landslides also, that this area is more prone to landslides. So landslide hazard zonation mapping, this can be done. So people will be aware, no, in the advance, that one should not construct a settlement here, one should not construct a road passing through this area. So that can be helpful. Then landslide warning techniques. Landslide warning techniques, again, development of some early warning systems like sensors which can detect the movement of the slope can be installed. Okay, so that can give information about the landslides. So in today's lecture we have discussed natural disasters. First was earthquake. So earthquake is nothing but a sudden and violent shaking of the ground with the release of energy in the form of seismic waves on the earth's surface. So the point where this energy is first released is known as hypocenter. Okay, and a point just above that is known as epicenter. Okay, then the study of earthquake is known as seismology. Instrument that is used to measure the seismic waves is called as a seismograph. What are the causes of earthquake? That, see, underground rocks, they suddenly break and there is a rapid motion of the rocks along a fault. This is because the crust of the earth is not stable, it is constantly moving, and therefore the rocks, they there is a rapid motion of rocks along the fault, and therefore a sudden release of energy is there in the form of seismic waves. Then we have discussed what are the effects of earthquake. First, there is ground shaking. Okay, intensity of ground shaking depends upon the duration, local geology, and the distance. And distance means what? At what depth is the hypocenter present? If the hypocenter is located very near to the surface of the ground, in that case the effects will be devastating. Okay, if the hypocenter is deep in the ground, in that case the effects might not be severe. Okay, then we have seen that there is collapse of man-made structures, isn't it? There is loss of life and property. So man-made structures like buildings, bridges, they collapse, people die, people suffer from various diseases, various ailments. Some of them lose parts of their body, they become completely dependent on others. And after an earthquake, psychological effects are seen. Then what are the mitigation strategies of earthquake? That construction of buildings which can tolerate earthquakes by keeping weak spots in the building to absorb vibration, then to keep pads or floats beneath the buildings so as to absorb the vibration. Then wooden houses should be preferred in the earthquake prone area. Um, older re older buildings should be reinforced and retrofitted to increase the earthquake resistance. Then establishment of an early warning system. Okay, soil testing can be done before a building is constructed on a particular area. Then we have looked at the various seismic zones in India, and earthquake is measured on richer scale. Then cyclones. Cyclones, they are nothing but spinning storm, okay, that rotate around a low pressure center. So how is this low pressure created? See, warm moist air on the surface of the ocean rises upward. Okay, so the temperature of the surface water on of the ocean is about 26 degrees Celsius. So a low pressure area is formed and the surrounding high pressure area pushes into the low pressure area. So that is responsible for creation of these spiraling winds, and the spiral rises. So height of the cyclone and width of cyclone both are huge. Then mitigation strategies for cyclone. Coastal tree plantation, particularly the mangrove forest, they act as buffer zones against the cyclone. So they will act as wind breaker against these storms, and the effect of cyclones can be reduced, isn't it? They will also try to slow down the speed of the cyclone. Then weather monitoring. Um, See, development of low pressure area can be forecasted, isn't it? Prior warnings may be given, so people can be shifted. So a minimum loss can be seen. Therefore, timely warnings they can play important role in this. Then land use control. Buildings and other structures that are built, they have to be wind resistant, and watertight doors and windows can be constructed. So if older buildings are there, they can be retrofitted, and also construction of embankments can be done. Okay, under making the underground communication lines mandatory in these areas. So these are all some of the mitigation strategies for cyclones. Then preparedness, adequate preparedness has to be on the side of the government and also the people. People have to be mentally prepared for the effects of cyclone, that if they are living in the coastal areas. So first of all, they should be given insurance cover. Then they should be mentally prepared that cyclones might occur, and in that case they have to shift to the interior parts. So shelter homes may be provided to the affected families. In the vicinity of these areas, wide roads should be there for quick evacuation of the people. And increasingly, the public has to be made aware the effects of cyclone. Okay. Then, having understood cyclones, we have discussed about the landslides. What is landslide? It is nothing but a combination of several geological processes that include earth movements like extensive slope failure, rocks falling, debris flowing under the action of gravity. This happens because the gravitational and other types of shear stresses uh, with a slope, they exceed the shear strength of materials that form the slope. Okay, as a result, huge rocks and the mud, they come to the base of the slope. Then we have discussed what are the causes of landslides. That they occur because of changes on the slope. Okay, the composition, structure, the hydrology, and vegetation of the slope undergoes a change. I told you this with respect to the construction on the slopes of Himalayan mountains. You can see many people they have, like in Uttarakhand and Himachal. So people they try to construct settlements in on the slopes, and therefore what will happen? The soil over there will not be able to hold these structures at after a particular time. And also these slopes they have sparse vegetation. That means very little amount of vegetation. So the trees are also not there to hold the soil to that extent. Therefore, changing land use is one of the major reason for landslides. Okay. Then excessive rainfall. In the areas which receive excessive rainfall, landslides are common. Okay. In the Western Ghats, you can see there are many times in the monsoon, landslides have been found, and they are known to cause traffic jams on the ghats. Okay. Then excavations of water minerals. Mineral extraction is one of the process which is responsible for causing n number of problems. So the landslide can also occur because of it. Then construction of tunnels uh, for passage through the mountains, to for connectivity. So those are also responsible for landslides. Construction of roads through these mountains, that is also one of the reason why landslides occur. Then how can one mitigate landslides? First is afforestation along the slopes. Okay, second is wired stone blocks. So this wire mesh you can see nowadays everywhere. If you happen to pass through ghats, and the wire mesh is there. Then wall structures can be erected, like construction of those concrete walls, so as to prevent the rocks to reach the roads. Then landslide hazard zonation mapping. This means that just like we have seismic zones mapped all over the India, we can do this for landslides as well. We can identify landslide prone areas and give a prior warning to people that construction should not be allowed on such slopes. Then landslide warning systems like sensors can be installed which can detect the movement of the mud or the rocks. Okay, so such new techniques or new technologies can help in the mitigating such disasters. So here we complete this unit, which is human, communities and environment. We have discussed in the beginning the impact of human population growth on environment, in which we have discussed its effect on agriculture, that there is stress on agriculture, freshwater source they become scarce, then pollution is caused, then global warming, depletion of ozone layer, species become extinct because they are unable to cope up with the climatic changes. Then impact on human health, the instances of there is increased instances of diseases, problem of shelter is also there. Then we have discussed the point resettlement and rehabilitation of persons, in which we discussed what is the difference between resettlement and rehabilitation, causes of rehabilitation and resettlement in India, particularly the developmental project and the natural disasters, challenges faced by these people, that there is inavailability of arable land in the new area, then insufficient economic support, that means they are unable to find a source of livelihood. Cultural assimilation is also there. Then the case study, that is Sardar Sarovar project, we discussed that it is one of the ambitious project of the government of India, and it is built on river Narmada. We have seen the economic packages and the infrastructure facilities that were given to those rehabilitated, and we have also seen or discussed what were the reviews given by the people, okay, whether they were happy or not with this resettlement or rehabilitation. Then in disaster management, we define first of all what is a disaster, the causes of a disaster. In India, there is National Disaster Management Authority for managing the disaster, and at the state level there is State Disaster Management Authority. The next topic was flood. Here, first of all, what is flood? It is nothing but unusual presence of, it is not presence of land, it is presence of water on land. Okay, just remember this correction, to a depth affecting normal activities. Causes of deforestation, causes of flood we have discussed. Then those are man-made causes and natural causes. Again, mitigation strategies we have discussed. Then in this lecture we discussed earthquake, how it is caused, what are seismic waves, then seismograph, effects of earthquakes, mitigation strategies that are there, then seismic zones of India, cyclones, how is a cyclone formed, and what are its effects, then mitigation strategies of a cyclone, and at the last we have discussed landslides, that landslides are common on the mountain slope, particularly in the northern parts of the country. And then we have discussed what are the causes of landslide, that there is changes along a slope or change in land use, excessive rainfall, earthquakes, all of these are responsible for landslides, and also developmental activities like construction of roads, extraction of minerals, building of tunnels in the mountains. Okay, then we discuss mitigation strategy. One can uh, conduct afforestation, wired stone blocks can be installed, then landslide hazard zonation mapping can be done, and landslide warning techniques can be developed.